Ed, I wouldn't appoint an old twerp like Horace Miller. Taylor, no Taylor.
Taylor? May I ask what Taylor has to do with this?
Well, he's still running the show, ain't he, Pop?
Emma, I will not have conversation of this sort carried on by the children at dinner.
Why don't you listen to your children for a change?
No doubt my children could make this appointment for me with the greatest ease.
That's easy, Dad. Jefferson Smith.
I beg your pardon?
Jefferson Smith. He's the only senator to have.
Sure, he ought to be president. I like Jeff Smith. Me too.
Oh, you too. Now everybody's been heard from. Well, forgive my abysmal ignorance, but I don't know this Jefferson Smith from a hole in the ground.
Gosh, Dad. Head of the Boy Rangers.
Oh, a boy.
No, Dad. Jeff's a man. Jeff Smith. Biggest expert we got in wild game and animals and rocks. Yeah, and right now he's the greatest hero we ever had. It's all over the headlines. Sure, didn't you see about the terrific forest fire all around Sweetwater?
I did. What about it?
Well, Jeff put that out himself.
Himself?
Now, if you really want a senator...
I do not want a senator. I do not want any more of this nonsense.
He's the greatest American we got, too, Dad. He can tell you what George Washington said by heart. And boy, stuff's got the swellest stuff in it.
What stuff?
Boy Stuff. That's the name of Jeff's paper. He prints it. Look, here's one. Oh, it's great. Everybody reads it. All the kids in the state. 1 million of them. Look, Pop.
I come before you today, humbled and humiliated, to ask you for one thing. I want you to kill Peter Parker.
Welcome back to another Pitchy and Palscast. How's everyone doing, Matt? Louis?
I'm doing fine, yeah.
Oh boy, already we encounter our first issue with attempting an online recording rather than in person.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting experience.
Fortunately, we're not also streaming this, so there won't be the incredible delay in between every question, like there is when I do the fighting game show.
Yeah, that would be incredibly annoying. That kind of stream delay can be killer on conversations.
Oh, it's just like working with telephones on radio.
Yeah, hopefully this will work a little bit better once we get used to it. Yeah.
So how are you all feeling after the movies I subjected you to on Saturday?
From what I remember, I fell asleep during one of them. And I don't think I stopped laughing for the other.
That's such a perfect encapsulation of both movies, just right there. It's just that's actually really good. I think Louis meant that as a really good summary of the movies, but that really does. That's perfect. You just basically end the podcast there as soon as you find out which movies they are.
Alright, thank you for listening, everyone. You can check the title to find out what the movies were. You've now had your reviews.
We'll see you next week.
Alright.
No, we jest.
Alright. I'll give some background. Last time, I attempted to look at how British identity is conveyed through film. So I figured I might as well do the same for American film and how American identity is projected through film. So I chose a film that I think is a fairly definitive film in the context of American history, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And then from there, I decided to choose a film which is both utterly mainstream, a little bit old, and also in a weird way winds up doing a lot of criticism of the sort of masculine identity and American identity that Mr. Smith Goes to Washington conveys. So that was Spider-Man 3 by Sam Raimi from 2007.
Quite a surprising mess, that second one. You know what surprises me the most about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington? I didn't realize it was so highly regarded.
I knew it was iconic, just from my perspective. It's that thing that people quote. Whenever you have a political story of any kind, you'll obviously have your idealist, and the old right-wing curmudgeon will say something like, "Okay, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington." You'll hear that kind of line trotted out. Yes. A lot of political dramas and stuff like that. It's the thing they go to. So I know it was iconic, and I guess I never really thought about whether it was iconic for good reasons or bad. But yeah, I knew it was popular.
Yeah, and you can see tributes to it in all sorts of locations, including The Simpsons, and frankly, that episode is better than the actual film.
It's not a very high bar.
If only because Lisa is the one who actually identifies who the corrupt people in the system are, instead of just going to a party off-screen and then a secretary telling them afterwards.
It's exceptionally poor storytelling, which is, what a movie is supposed to do. So, and to say it fails at that is really to say it fails as a movie, which I think it does.
Yet it is a weirdly ahead of its time film, because 70 years later, the jump cuts employed midway through scenes in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington would become the bog-standard way of presenting vlogs on YouTube.
Oh, I'm kind of getting... Yeah, I remember you guys talking about that as it was happening. But
basically what I'm
I didn't
referring
quite pick it
to
up.
is there's a number of times throughout the film where clearly it's transitioning from footage taken from one take and footage from a different take. And there's just enough variation in the character's positioning and or the camera's positioning that you can tell it's a different take. But the way that it's done, it inadvertently looks like the way that jump cuts are used in YouTube videos to provide that continual sense of momentum, and that you need to be paying attention at all times. And so it inadvertently works for that same reason. It's just unfortunate that what's being said is for the most part really simplistic and incredibly dull.
Yeah, I don't think any of us really liked this movie that much. Louis fell asleep in it. Do you know when you fell asleep, Lou? Like, what was the last thing you remember, and then the first thing you remember when you woke back up?
Not enough for it to be significant for the plot.
You could sleep through a lot of this movie, though, to be honest. And you'd probably be fine. You'd know what was going on.
I guess it would have been... It was just before everything was sort of leading up to him going to, do his... what do you call it?
His filibuster?
Yeah, filibuster.
Okay.
So it was sort of around the time... Yeah, where I guess him and his secretary must have done some prepping or something, and then just sort of they're heading into the chamber, and he's now going to be doing the thing. I think that's around the time I fell asleep or woke up. Yeah, around there.
Okay. At least you didn't miss the two best scenes in the movie that we'll talk about probably at some point. But yeah, you didn't miss much.
I'm going to guess what you're saying there. It's the scene where he punches a bunch of people. And
yes.
The scene where possibly a car full of young boys is murdered.
That is an amazing scene. That is...
Kuleshov, eat your heart out. Odessa Steps, you've got nothing on the car full of boys.
It's just such a weird moment. It's so strangely violent for... this is obviously... The punching was strangely violent enough, but then there's a scene really late in the film when the bad guy is trying to shut everyone up from saying this guy is doing a filibuster, and they just run these kids off the road. I've never seen anything quite like it. Even in more violent films, it would be quite a shocking moment, and this movie just treats it as just, it's just a thing that happens.
I think it's supposed to make you mad. But yeah, certainly I just made a snide comparison to the Odessa Steps sequence from the Battleship Potemkin, but everything about the pacing and editing through that sequence is geared specifically to make you utterly furious at the Tsarist state. Whereas this is just in the middle of a sequence of just flashes of the occasional newspaper and lots of rousing support. And just in the middle of it, oh, by the way, there's some silencing still going on. It comes off really, really weak as far as propaganda. And certainly, this film certainly comes off as a propaganda piece.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's just because of how simplistic it is, or whether it really I that was a question in my mind. Does it qualify as a propaganda piece? How much different is this to what would be your garden variety propaganda? I don't know what you guys
Well,
thought
it's
of
not
that.
state-funded propaganda, but it is certainly an ideologically driven piece. The ability for one man to completely overturn a system just through being the best and most American he can be.
Yeah.
Do you think people listening will know the basic plot of Mrs. Smith Goes to Washington? I feel like I knew the bare bones of it before going in. But
Well, the bare bones is basically all we need.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
Because the connective tissue is, for the most part, really boring. And certainly that's consistent with how a lot of propaganda films are, where, since they're so simplistic and often such bad faith ideology, it just becomes really, really boring to watch. Because you need to have... Certainly there is a fantastic essay entitled Fascism that discusses the fascist worldview, and how ultimately one of the problems with that ideological mindset is that you need to present your enemies as simultaneously an all-powerful, all-consuming, world-dominating force that needs to be overturned, but also so cowardly and pathetic and weak that they can be defeated instantly.
Yeah, I would love to see a challenge to try and find the most exciting, well-made, and enjoyable to watch propaganda pieces.
I would say Potemkin.
Yeah, Potemkin.
Potemkin has a real energy and buzz to it.
Starship Troopers.
Yeah, or Starship Troopers. Though, of course, that's firmly in the realm of satire.
Yeah.
Rather than the other way that satire is created. You've got bad faith ideology, and it's so inherently bizarre that when you're earnest about it, it winds up becoming a gigantic cell phone.
What?
Take something like Frank Miller's 300 and the Zack Snyder film adaptation of it. Like, Frank Miller wrote that utterly in favor of the Spartans, that this is a piece demonstrating what it means to be a real man, to be really violent and tough and awesome. But certainly, the way that Zack Snyder, and I think that it is by far his best film, the way he elevates every single facet of its imagery and its tone, it comes off as a satire on that hypermasculinity, and winds up becoming just, they're kind of buffoons. And this is so absurd that you cannot take it seriously.
Yeah, well, like, Gerard Butler's character, the guy obviously in charge of the Spartans, like, isn't his downfall pretty much as being a complete jackass to
everyone?
Someone, to everyone, and to the one in particular, like a guy who has a bad back or something like that. He's kind of he's disabled in some way.
He abuses a disabled person, and before that, he starts a war because he was mildly slighted by an ambassador.
So he kind of he's his own worst enemy in that film, despite being a great hero.
I'm getting to the satire line here because this film claims to... Certainly there was writing by Frank Capra that claimed the film is a satire. It's hard to tell what it's trying to satirize because of just how earnest its tone is.
It's incredibly earnest.
And
to the point of having Jimmy Stewart play the main character.
I was thinking about Mr. Smith actually before we started doing this, the character himself. And I think the weird thing for me is that I usually connect with those kind of characters. I'm that one person who usually likes that slightly vanilla, idealistic hero of a story who's probably a little bit naive, but
if you
tries.
If you do the honest, try-hard, passionate babyface right, certainly I think like Monkey D. Luffy from One Piece or Deku from My Hero Academia are good recent anime examples, then it can be such a moving and such a useful character to have, particularly for male audiences to see what being a man can actually be, that it can be compassionate as well as resilient.
Yeah, sure. You can think of female examples as well, but I'm really surprised that how little I connected with Mr. Smith. Like, I couldn't hate the movie, but you'd usually still root for him. But I'm interested to know why exactly I didn't care for him that much. I didn't really care about his success or failure, even though it is a character archetype that I'd usually enjoy.
For me, the reason I can't connect with him is because I have had mandatory reporting child safety qualifications before, and since his entire political goal while he's been positioned as a senator is to set up a national boys' camp in a specific state that... Let's look at the ramifications here of just taking boys from everywhere in the country into a single camp, and this is America, so that is at least 50 million people at the time of recording, and if you institutionalize it, that would mean every boy in a population of 230 million, which also needs to be funded entirely by the attendees. It's not something that I can get behind, logistically or for children's safety.
Yeah, it sounds like an absolute nightmare.
And it's not that big of a deal as well. I mean, you can talk about the logical issues with it. It's also, like, just tough to get behind it in terms of, like, it's such a trivial thing to happen.
Yes.
At least from my point of view. Like, there's no real stakes here.
Yeah, like, even if you took a fully conservative sort of stance, or say, he's really passionate about removing a specific tax that's affecting his town, then something like that, or even something grander, he wants to reduce certain sorts of abuses, or anything that has more at stake for actually benefiting and enriching lives, then a nature camp would be nice.
It required them to put it onto the bad guy with the dam to make it vaguely have any consequences.
And even then, you could have an interesting discussion about environmental things, but of course, this film predates environmentalism as a movement, so you can't expect it to do that.
It could have just been about the dam. I mean, it could have been he is upset that they're building a dam and maybe it's going to be affecting something in the region, and it could have been about that, not this, we're going to do the camp thing because boys need to be boys.
The only way it kind of makes sense in my mind is if you really go full into the movie's kind of, I don't know, almost like spiritual love of what it is to be American. And it's not that these kids are going to have a fun time at camp, it's they're going to learn, the spirit of America will enter them while on that camp.
Yeah, he says that he wants the camp to inspire the children about America the way seeing the lights atop the Parliament building inspired him.
Yeah. Well, why don't they just do that then? Take them to Parliament and see the lights.
Yeah, it's like you have to go really far into that kind of mode of thinking to have for these camps that he wants, or the camp that he wants to create, to have any kind of meaning at all. And it's almost like you have to turn it into a fantasy movie where you replace America with a magical source of love or compassion, or you have to go to the magical elvish camp to learn, how to be a hero. It's that kind of level of fantasy.
We're already leaning on the Iran implications here, where the only reason that objectivism functions in Atlas Shrugged is because as soon as the scientists are unrestricted, they literally discover magic.
And in this case, for this movie, magic is Americanism.
Filibusters.
Is America. Yes, it's filibuster.
Because nothing speaks more to freedom and protecting the weak and standing up for your rights and in the spirit of Abraham Lincoln ending the Civil War than a legal loophole that allows you to talk unopposed for as long as you are physically capable of speaking.
Yeah,
that's what being a hero is. Wear them down. You don't need...
Being a hero is not giving up.
It's about wearing down people's patience. That's what men do to get what they need. If violence doesn't work, you wear down everyone's patience.
It's... I can see a movie where a filibuster being a part of it can work, where you can kind of, you can go for the angle of, look, the system is broken, our hero has no other options, but wait, there's this weird legal loophole, and I don't like the fact that it exists, but look, they're going to build this dam, they're going to ruin lives of the children, and you can take that kind of stand on it, where instead of glorifying it, you show it in that kind of light.
You really need, the filibuster needs to be used to highlight the need for structural reform in the way that a political system works, rather than to complain about a secret cabal of people running the country.
Well, I mean, it almost celebrates the filibuster.
Oh, it absolutely does.
Yeah, it's not like in any way criticizing that this is something that maybe needs to be fixed. It's just that no, filibusters are great.
Because they can show that you can stick to your principles and no one can stop you from having your opinions no matter what.
It's so American.
Yes, there's a quip I've heard a number of times over the years in different contexts, which is that America is incapable of making political satire because this film exists. And the lasting impact it has had on how Americans view their politics. They just haven't got the visual framework and coding for how to actually satirize their parliament.
Yeah, because instead of like we watched In the Loop.
In the Loop, yes.
In the Loop recently, where that shows politics kind of in terms of A, a system, and B, people that are immensely flawed.
Yes.
And it's a battle of like almost our own like natures to try and get something done. It's a broken system, and the people inside it are not broken. Heroes and are broken, but they're not straight villains or heroes. And it is broken, battered people in a broken system.
And the key
instead
thing
you have
the key thing is between these two is that in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the agency and impact is entirely the result of individuals. It's because of individuals that things happen, and it's because of individuals that you can fix things. Whereas all of Armando Iannucci's work is much more about that the root cause of things is systemic, and that systemic abuses can result in shaping individuals to then operate in a way which benefits that system. And that is what creates the vicious cycle.
Yeah. It makes more sense to me, and makes for a more interesting political kind of movie than, say, Mr. Smith does. But then again, like, I think even if you take that away, it's interesting that it's not good a political movie, but it's also not a very good
movie.
I'm not sure how you would. It's not a very good movie. Like, it's not. It's even if you just were okay with, it's just like a hero trying to. If like the main text of the movie is just a hero trying to save kids from not being able to. God, I can't even save kids from not being able to go to a camp. It's like it's not just one man's fight for goodness and stuff like that. It's what am I trying to say here? I'm saying that even as a regular movie like that, it also fails.
The narrative isn't interesting, and the visual filmmaking isn't very interesting for the most part either. Like, perhaps the most interesting shot in the entire film is the rear screen projection while they're in a train station.
I thought there was one scene. I'm trying to remember it now because it's been a little while, but I think it was in The Secretary. Helen, I think her name is.
The Secretary.
The Secretary, fair enough. There's a shot where she's at her desk and Mrs. Smith, he's just arrived in Washington, and he opens the door. And there's the sun is coming through the window, and it just, I don't know, I just felt it looked like a really good shot, just strangely for the rest, the movie didn't look that great. Yeah, and it was like, you see the light coming in through, and it's a nicely set up shot, and I was like, wow, that looks nice.
It's like, there's a couple of times when where Jefferson Smith is first explaining his idea to his secretary of the boys' camp. And you know it's supposed to be inspirational and amazing because it cuts to a reaction shot of the secretary, and suddenly it's a full-on soft-focus glamour shot as she's so amazed by his purity that she's really falling in love with him.
It's funny that we watched The Book of Henry semi-recently before this, because Mr. Smith, he obviously isn't anywhere near as bad as Henry, but he has that the same kind of just unrealistic... he's just so good. He's just so fantastic. In this way, with Henry, it's worse because it's not just his moral intentions. It's also he's also brilliant and perfect, on intelligence level.
Yeah,
but I felt this. While Mr. Smith doesn't have that, there's just this. He's ludicrously good and moral, and it can be hard to fully get behind someone who is utterly without flaw.
Yeah, I mean it's good bordering on twee. There's no. I mean, I don't want to say there's no edge to him, but I mean it's.
Well, he has flaws because his first reaction to being slighted is to just lash out in pure righteous violence.
But is that framed as?
But that's what I'm going to get to. It's not treated as a flaw. It's treated as a virtue. That the correct first response is to be violent. And if the violence doesn't work, then you just need to wear down their patience and yell at them until they relent that way. That is what being
Yeah.
an American man is.
Yeah, we finally got into the first of the really good scenes in the movie.
Yes, the scene where he walks around and just punches every news reporter in the face.
I remember.
It comes
Sorry.
out of nowhere and it feels out of character.
Yeah, I was thinking because obviously Adam already watched this film, so he knew what was going on and stuff like that. But me and Louis hadn't, and I remember we both jumped to the same conclusion that it was a dream sequence. And I remember thinking to myself during the scene. Now, basically, the idea is that he's slighted in the newspapers. Like they twist his words. Yeah, smear campaigners. Yeah, and he's angry at this, and he reads it on the newspaper, and then it just kind of jumps. It just jumps from him reading the newspaper to just him punching people, like punching the people in the media who ran the smear campaign.
Yeah, there's no interim scenes of him moving around and finding people, then punching them. No, it's just straight to the punch. Punch.
Yeah.
Next person, punch. Next person, punch.
And it's funny, but it's I remember feeling kind of dumb when it was happening because I was like, "Oh my god, what is happening?" Like when he first few punches, and Lou was reacting in a similar manner, and then we both kind of came to the conclusion, "Oh wait, it's a dream," and I felt really dumb that I hadn't worked that out. It's like, "Oh, I'm such an idiot. Of course it's a dream. I should have realized that from the first punch. I'm such a dumb idiot person." And then I was waiting for it to like reveal to be that dream, and then the movie just kept on going. It was like this awkward moment where I'm waiting for the dream to end.
I had to clarify. No, that actually happened. The film thinks this is good.
I'm not going to complain because it was one of the few exciting, fun parts of the movie, but it was insane.
Now, we were talking before about how, like, it's not a good film, and you could say, well, you know, it's from 1939. We were still working out how you make film, how you tell stories, how you convey visuals. King Kong predates this film. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari predates this film. M predates this film. And The Third Man predates this film. People had worked out lots of elements of how you tell stories that are interesting and engaging. And Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is not one of them.
Man, that's just...
When are we doing M? Man, I want to do M now.
Yeah, no, you make me want to watch M.
Yeah, I feel like you guys are better equipped for this kind of stuff. I remember writing down a few notes about just like how like things worked scene to scene that I didn't like, and I couldn't tell whether they were just how old movies were or whether it was just because the movie itself was bad.
I mean,
like
there are elements of that.
Yeah.
But I mean, like even comparing it to like other, like the only other Frank Capra thing I've seen is It's a Wonderful Life, which is
much later in his career, to be fair.
Yeah, and they just I mean, it's a more enjoyable movie. But
I would love to ask like a couple of more specific questions just to like find out whether this is like from old movies. I remember like the movie starts off with no preamble. It's a very just like straight into it. And I found to me that the scenes acted like they had like a really strict time limit. This is like right at the start of the film, especially. Like it felt like they were just rushing through their lines, and the movie kind of felt breathless in its like how it went from scene to scene.
Yeah, that one's partially a consequence of this being early into talkies, and a lot of the time people didn't know how to actually pace out conversation on film, and were also concerned about using too many reels. So sometimes that would happen that you would just rush through your stuff. But again, you look at like The Third Man, and that has very nice pacing in how people converse with each other, which probably lends to the fact that Orson Welles had a lot of radio experience at that point.
I think as well, this is probably even more likely just to be an old movie kind of thing, but there's like I thought there's like a lack of ambience to scenes. Like there's no sounds really other than just what's going on in the scene. There's not like if you watch like movies today, you can like get into moods and into atmospheres if the movie is good usually. But in this, it's like it does feel a little bit just like watching a scene from a play that's just been put on video. If that makes sense. There's just a few scenes where like there's no real atmosphere to any of the scenes.
Yeah, a lot
in
of
this film, especially at the start of the film.
A lot of how those elements of mise-en-scène were developed was mostly in European film circles at this point. Where, of course, in the early French circles, you had a lot of the effects tricks being worked out. Particularly German film is where a lot of atmosphere was developed. Like, again, I brought up M, and that one has this really nice tense tone to it. Films like The Third Man have really nice development of how you light scenes. I also brought up Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I love to bring up that film because it's in the middle of the Nazi regime, and they'd cut funding on the film because they suspected it might have been dissenting towards the government. And so they couldn't afford lighting, and thus instead they painted every single part of every set in the colours to indicate the lighting they wanted. Which leads to this amazing surreal atmosphere in every shot. We just get these crazy black and white swirls everywhere.
That sounds like really interesting, and I think it'd be really interesting to see like things that we take for granted now, and to see them being developed in early film, because you can definitely see their lives. It's one of those things where if you watch films and TV shows today constantly, and that's all you grow up with them, and you just kind of you only notice the things that are done automatically now when they're not there. I think, and I think watching this film was like a real eye-opener of just like how far we've come. And there's a lot of things that I realized I didn't really have the skill or the knowledge to point out specifically that we're missing. Like, I can just say, look, the atmosphere isn't there, the ambience isn't there. Like, I can't really point out the specifics of it, but I can tell there's a lack there. And, yeah.
Yeah, certainly one of the other ones that was a real big development later on, particularly in the 50s, is Foley. Just, people hadn't worked out the concept of Foley really yet. That, by the way, is all the incidental audio that you use in film to make it sound like it's actually happening. Just things like footsteps, the sound of opening a door, the sound of touching a glass, all those little things, and quite often you will use stock sound effects for them, which then creates that very distinct sound of film where, like, how a door opens in film sounds nothing like how any of the doors in your house open. But as soon as you hear that sound, you go,
crash.
Like, it does not, unless you're well versed in the stock Foley assets, you won't notice this. It's just, it's a door opening. My brain is recognizing this door has opened in the story I'm watching.
I love that this movie is so boring that in order to get some decent conversation about it, we're having to
talk
move
about Foley.
Just like, not just Foley, but just like basic film concepts and developments to try and just get something out of it. I think it can't be overstated just how, like, I'm reading through my notes now. I've got montage boring, story boring, this scene is boring, God, this movie is boring, simplistic and boring. It just keeps coming up in the notes again and again. It's a hard movie to keep your attention on for a large space of it.
I think we've just about covered what we need to. So let's talk about this in relation to Spider-Man 3. One of the last superhero films before the Marvel Cinematic Universe struck the world.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I've got at the top of my notes for Spider-Man 3, oh yeah, and that might make it sound like I was really excited to watch it. It wasn't that, although it was enjoyable. We kind of had this like running gag throughout the film where the words that you'll speak the most during it is "oh yeah," just because of how many like plot threads are being juggled in this movie.
Yeah, certainly
it's oh yeah, the movie.
As a singular text, one of the great problems with Spider-Man 3 is it has too many plot threads that it's trying to juggle at once, and you do completely forget about and cease to care about a number of them, which is quite sad because on its own, things like the Sandman is quite well realized as a sympathetic character who's a really good foil for what Peter Parker's character arc is in this film, which is learning to think about people besides himself, learn that everyone else struggles and has problems just like he has had.
Yeah, it's that thing where there'd be a lot of movies actually that have this problem, or just stories in general, where every individual element, or at least mostly individual elements, are interesting of themselves and could be great stories in of themselves, but they're just it's difficult to realize them all because there's no time in the story because there's just too many of them.
And this is already like a 2-hour, 15-minute movie.
Yeah. I know that's not the most original or creative of things to say about Spider-Man 3. I hadn't watched it until we watched it for this podcast, but I already knew like what people were saying about it, and I know that it's not the most original thing to say, that it's overstuffed, but it is what comes to mind immediately. Yeah.
And of course, the best thing about how overstuffed, as you said, it is that the first thing that, as an editor, I would like to cut out is every fight scene in a superhero movie. Those are the least interesting scenes and have, for the most part, the least bearing on the character narratives that are going on. Like this one, more than most superhero movies, really is a soap opera, and is at its strongest when it's being one.
Well, there's really only one fight scene that was interesting at all in this movie, and that was with Harry in the apartment.
Actually,
Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah. And that one was funny as well.
Yeah. But that one had something behind it, because, you know, we actually, James Franco notwithstanding, we actually kind of care about these characters.
It's also the scene which most accentuates one of the film's themes, which is that violence is pretty much a terrible answer, and that the fact that Peter and Harry are fighting at that point is a tremendous failure on both of their parts.
Yeah.
It's
not the worst thing.
No. We've used up our Book of Henry quota for this week.
No, we can't do that. It's it does. It'd be interesting to see a cut of this film where you just cut out most of the fight scenes. But you'd have to be used to make way for more scenes to flesh out the actual drama scenes. So
you can just cut down
you can't save it with editing.
60-second cuts, and you'll get all the emotive relevance without the tedious video game sequence. And especially that first fight scene really does look like a 2009 PS3 computer game cutscene.
Yeah,
my memory on that one.
That's the one where Spider-Man is swinging around and Harry is chasing him on the surfboard glider.
Oh right,
and his engagement ring gets knocked flying several times, and it goes for about 3 times as long as it needs.
Yeah, and then he gets Hollywood amnesia.
Yes.
Yeah, before we go to that, I will say the bit right at the start of the fight is good, which goes to like making them shorter. The first step of the fight where Harry, like Spider-Man, like Peter is not in his Spider-Man suit at the start of that fight. He's just like on his bike, I think. And it's just the way how abruptly it starts. Actually, I got a bit of a laugh out of it. Just like he's just going down the street, he's just Peter Parker, and Harry just like picks him up and just like, I don't know, just starts the fight so abruptly that I found it rather funny. And he's just like, it had to be like this, Parker. It's like, wow, okay, we're just doing this right now. I think it's because the scene, but I think almost literally the scene before it, we had the setup to it where he's angry at Peter. And usually you kind of expect it to build, but no, he just
goes right in.
Scene. Yeah, So that was funny. Fortunately, the rest of the fight is, you're right. CGI has come a long way since Spider-Man 3, and it shows in that fight.
Venom, I feel like I kind of want to bring up.
Okay, let's talk Venom.
Is such a... Yeah, let's talk Venom for a bit. There are some amusing scenes. I mean, there's the symbiote stuff, but
yeah, essentially, the Venom suit in relation to Peter Parker is at a time when Peter Parker is very much lacking in empathy and very much focused on himself. And this you could read as being how radicalization requires an external influence in order to bring someone to that next level. And that's kind of what Peter Parker spends a good chunk of this movie doing, is getting radicalized. And eventually, it coming to a violent head, and him realizing just the monster he's becoming. In very literal terms.
Yeah.
Which makes it sound better than it probably is. I mean, that's a great...
That's
right up of it.
Spider-Man 3. There are some very interesting ideas, and some interesting presentation of those ideas. Like... There's the bit where I wanted to bring up the use of children in both of these films. Because quite often when you're using children in film, it's to signify innocence and purity. But it can also be used to signify things like change and the future and long-term planning. And so, like, the children in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington are used to assert both Mr. Smith, Jefferson Smith's purity, and all they do is gush about how great he is. And so the one time where the children reject him is seen as like, we are destroying our future because we won't listen to Jefferson Smith. Whereas the use of children in Spider-Man 3 is two scenes in particular which I find interesting in how they use them. One is towards the end, where the previous two Spider-Man movies show a lot of scenes where Peter Parker is quite thrifty and innovates ways to make money. Whereas in Spider-Man 3, the point where he achieves stable income is at the height of his hubris and failure as a person. Likewise from here, there is a child who's thrifty, but specifically in the purpose of screwing over an old asshole. A kid who just stiffs the crap out of J. Jonah Jameson towards the end of the film, and not only does she stiff him out of $100 to use a cheap, crappy camera, he then has to pay extra for the film. So we have there, like, the future is not just making money, but, like, specifically punching up at those in power. The other way children are used in this film is that what Mr. Smith Goes to Washington would consider the height of Peter's success, where everyone loves Spider-Man, there's signs everywhere saying New York loves Spider-Man, they're throwing a parade in his honor. The parade isn't because Spider-Man's a swell guy, it's because he specifically saved the daughter of someone who's in power, and at the peak of this, he decides to do a little kiss spot with that daughter to try and get a pop from the crowd. And there's a kid in the front of this crowd, which the editing continually cuts back to, yelling, "No, Spider-Man, no!"
Spidey, no!
As he furiously gestures, "No, do not do this." Logically, and within the diegesis of the text, this makes no sense. This kid doesn't know who Peter Parker is. This kid doesn't know that Peter Parker is dating and about to propose to Mary Jane Smith. But thematically, here is the future saying, "No, I am rejecting all this pomp and circumstance, and I am rejecting you just taking advantage of this situation for your own personal gain."
I mean, alternatively, the kid just doesn't like kissing. Like, he does, like, a disgusted face,
Well,
like,
it's not
cuties.
really a disgusted face. It's more of, like, this determined outrage, like he's calling for Spidey's help. Rather than, like, just a gross reaction shot. There's different ways you could gesture to do that. But no, it's just like this outright rejection that this is an inherently bad thing he's doing.
Yeah, it's exceptionally funny.
The editing makes it incredibly funny. But there's certainly these ideas playing all the way throughout the film.
Yeah, I think the tragedy of a movie whose problem is that it has too many plots being juggled is that you'll get into a situation where it's easy to say to cut a bad plot. Like, it's easy and popular to say, like, say with The Last Jedi, to say, let's just cut all the stuff at the casino, because it's a bad plot, it's not interesting to watch, there's no real positive side to it, just cut it. But with this movie, like...
positives there.
Okay,
Yeah.
well...
We'll get to that when we talk about The Last Jedi.
Sure. But with even... Well, okay, that's my opinion, you just cut the whole damn thing. But with Spider-Man 3, you'll get in a situation where to say that I want to cut stuff from it, like, I don't think that Venom is actually needed. The Parasite, in general, is not needed in Spider-Man 3. But, in saying that, there are so many just magical scenes with it. With Eddie Brock, with Peter Parker being evil. They're just magical to watch. They're like the scene with him dancing, the scene with the bully cell, like... Yeah.
You can have Peter at the height of his hubris, but Peter at the height of his magically enhanced hubris just takes the ideas and the entertainment value up that extra notch.
Yeah. And that's oh yeah, sorry, you go, Lee.
I just wanted to bring up also when he, in the black Spidey suit, takes Eddie Brock's camera and breaks it, and it just basically tells him, like, fuck you, and then leaves.
Yeah, it's so good.
Well, later, if you want to apologize, get religion.
Yeah, really.
Followed by him going to a church.
See, that's another one of the great things about this. I was mentioning before how, like, that big fight between Peter and Harry in the at the end of the second act is very much a failure on both characters' part. And likewise, we see that Eddie Brock's attempts at violence are treated as the wrong response to any situation. And it's taken up, since of course, Peter was violent before, and that was treated as bad. But Eddie, since he's a villain, whereas this was a good person making the wrong decision, with Eddie Brock Jr., he's a bad person making the bad decision. So he goes to a church, kneels before a crucifix, and begs God, if you are there, I'm not a praying man, but please, kill Spider-Man.
What a moment! It's funny because it's that double bluff, right? Like, it's funny because you weren't expecting him to actually go to church, so you're already like laughing at that. It's just the insanity of that. Then you're laughing at the idea that Brock might be a religious person who might be actually reforming his ways, and then you twist it right at that last moment. It's a really good comedy, and definitely one of the scenes that I remember really well.
And then thematically, you get this interesting juxtaposition where, in a way, his prayer is granted, as it becomes the exact same moment where Peter Parker is finally rejecting what he has turned Spider-Man into.
Yeah. Which is also, like, it's, like you say, soap drama. It's like a very, like...
Oh, yeah.
The confluence of events here is just so ludicrous that, it's... The movie isn't meant to be logical. It's...
It's all about feels, and it's certainly a lot of the time the feel that it goes for is humor. And we're remembering so much of the wackiness of this film, and also some of the poignancy of it because it's funny.
And sorry to get back to the other point, like, we're talking about Venom right now, but there are also other plots, like with Sandman, with Mary Jane, and it's just such a shame, like, we talk about the highlights of them all, and they all look... And Harry is another subplot. And it's that thing where, because there's so many, and because they overclutter, it's to get rid of... to try and cut them down means to lose such amazing moments. And that's what I meant by, like, the tragedy of a movie that's overstuffed.
Yes.
Because you have to kind of kill babies, really. You have to kind of say, as good as this singular moment was, for the betterment of the movie, it probably would have been better not to have Eddie Brock or Venom in it, despite that amazing scene in the church, despite those amazing scenes with Evil Peter. Yeah.
Evil Peter coming into J. Jonah's place to show that Eddie Brock has actually photoshopped his latest pictures. Oh, man.
It's so good. And you could say the same thing, like, if you absolutely had to have Venom in it, then maybe you should have cut Sandman, and that has the same problem of, like, but there's lots of great scenes here. Or maybe you should have cut the Harry stuff, but there's so many great scenes here.
And certainly the fact that Peter ultimately forgives and lets Sandman go and understands the nuance that's going on in his life is an important way of capping off what the story's about. It's just... Yeah, like, the big picture ideas of this film, and a lot of how it conveys these ideas, is really good. But the way that it becomes a cohesive discussion of these themes gets muddled up by just all these moving pieces, all these moving parts that need to be fiddled around with constantly. Yeah,
it's like eating a meal that's, like, been really well cooked, but you have to, like, only eat it in small bites, and you have to keep on coming back to it. Like, you take a bite, and then you have to walk away for a little while, and you have to come back to it. And so by the time it's actually finished, it doesn't actually feel that filling, because it hasn't been like a cohesive meal. You haven't eaten it in the correct way.
Yeah, while at the same time it feels really tiring as well. Because you've taken 2.5 hours to eat what should have been a 10-minute meal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's too many different things to eat.
Yeah.
And they're not all working together.
Basically, it's Sushi Train. Spider-Man 3 is Sushi Train.
It's a shame because it's still technically enjoyable, like, because it will skip from subplot to subplot, and there'll be these little magical moments that happen in them. Usually funny. Every once in a while, something that's more poignant, but it's mostly humor. That's it's the strongest point of this movie is
while it's
laughing
not
at
a
schlock mostly.
Yeah, well, it's not a well-paced movie or anything. None of these little almost vignettes seems to like stay for too long. It which is, I guess, like they're long enough that we're kind of interested by them, and then we get, but they're also long enough to forget what we've been watching, which is why we keep getting these oh yeah moments.
So basically what you're saying is that the full title of this film is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, 2007 Best Vines.
Yeah.
It does have a highlight reel quality to it, yeah.
It's 2 or 3 other movies. It's an anime summary movie.
Yeah, I can kind of agree with that.
I like to say that one of the things it is, that is through the whole thing. We talk about the stop-start nature of it, and just because I'm forgetting about plot lines. One thing that is amazing all the way is Sam Raimi's editing, from shot to shot, is just...
Oh, it's
a joy.
His continuity editing is incredible. Like, he has such amazing comedic timing in how he edits things.
Yeah. We talked about the boy shutting no Spidey no. That's one example. The first time I actually noticed it was Harry is starting to remember that Peter...
Yes.
About what... that Peter may have killed his father. That he thinks that Peter has killed his father. And it just... Because when he gets amnesia... Peter says something like "yep" or "yep," and it just cuts back to that. It's it's my father is dead. Yup, and Maguire has this
the shit-eating grin he has.
Yeah, it's my father is dead. Yup, just it's. That was one of the scenes. There's a few scenes in this movie that just you laugh. It's a bellowing kind of laugh. It's so funny.
If we're talking about comedic editing, we have to bring up the one with Sandman when he's in the sewer.
Yes,
and
that's my favorite.
Yeah.
And he's tearing it open, and the bolts are in time with the editing, and they're jumping closer and closer up to Sandman's face until the fun one bursts, and then it just all explodes in his face. Very great.
Yeah, I'm looking at the editor of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies to see what else he was an editor on. And...
that guy deserves a medal. He did
the Hurt Locker.
I've not seen that.
And there's a lot of schlock in here, which makes sense. He was the editor for Army of Darkness, but not the other Evil Deads.
Okay. That makes those the most schlocky kind of edits.
Yeah, that one's got the funniest editing.
Third one. Yeah.
Certainly building on.
They'll just throw stuff at Bruce. Just throw stuff and see how he reacts to it.
What this movie did make me feel was, I want Sam Raimi to make something again, like a movie or something.
How about he made a movie with it's James Franco. And he's a carny magician.
Said that.
And he goes to the land of Oz, and then he reenacts the plot of Evil Dead 3, but it's worse in every way.
Yeah, we're gonna move on from that. But I think that's a great segue to one of the problems with this film, which is at times also a great strength of it, is that James Franco is a terrible, terrible actor who is wrong for every role he ever does, including this one.
When he's being just a stoner in stoner movies, then he is sufficiently stoned.
Okay, fair enough. But Harry is not supposed to be a stoner. At least I don't think so. And I think whenever
he ate that pie.
Yeah, damn it, that was the ending. Damn, that was the end of the tangent. But yeah, fair enough. Instead, we'll do that first. But yeah, he's really bad except for that one scene where he tells Peter that he's been sleeping with Mary Jane, or that he's with Mary Jane. And he's actually strangely, during that particular part of the scene, for James Franco, he's actually very solemn and very serious, which is strange for Franco. I don't think he smiled even once, which Franco is really strange. But when Peter leaves, he leaves the restaurant and he looks back. And I think the waitress asks, "How is he enjoying the pie?" And he just goes, "Yeah, it's great." He just has a smile. It's amazing, and I think everyone burst out laughing. Yeah.
No, not just that though. Is that Peter stops, turns around, and looks back to him.
Yeah.
Harry, I'm pretty sure, winks.
Yeah, he just doesn't. Yeah, he smiles again and winks at him.
But then does also and then the Hollywood villain disappear behind a bus thing happens.
Yeah.
It's such a weird scene because I think in that moment Peter realizes that Harry remembers. Like he knows that it's all a trick.
Yes.
And it's like the trick lasts like 10 seconds, and Harry purposefully like shows his hand with that smile. It's not he knows that Peter's looking at him. Like he makes that trick up, like he makes that lie up, and then immediately like sandbags it as soon as Peter looks back. Like, what was his plan if Peter didn't look back at him? Like, it's so amazing. It's such a funny scene, and I remember at that point maybe I was really into it at that point because I was just laughing at everything that was happening at that point.
Yeah, again we get to if this film were purely a soap opera and or sitcom, then it would be the greatest superhero movie ever made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to, especially because of how much fun we had with this film and how much I think we've been enjoying talking about it. There was one thing this is like a shame to bring it down a little bit, but there was one thing that I thought was a little bit off when I was watching, and there's probably something to be said about how the lady characters in this film are treated. In particular, Mary Jane and what's her name? Gwen Stacy? Yeah, I just feel like...
the trophy girl.
Yes, the trophy... Well, there you go. I do feel that they're treated somewhat poorly in this film. Kirsten Dunst is really good, I think, as an actress, so she can help save it a little bit. And she does have, I will say, like, the positive stuff.
She does as much as she can. She does as much as she can with what she's given.
Yeah, and she is given at least a couple of nice moments near the end of the film. She's trying to be saving herself slightly. Like, there's a scene where she actually saves Spider-Man by dropping something on Venom's face or something like that. She does help in the fight a little bit, which is nice. But for the most part, I feel like they're often used as props. Or as, like, playing pieces, either to hurt...
Rather literally in one scene with, like, the dance scene in the jazz club.
Yes, that's a great example, yeah.
And that's where we get to, if this film was a much tighter film with way less dangling plot threads. Like, really, if I were told to tell Spider-Man 3 the story of Peter learning to empathize, and it's got to have the Sandman in it, then I would have wanted to build the film entirely around Peter just treating Mary Jane like crap and constantly ignoring her and being thoroughly up himself, while at the same time continually lashing out violently against the Sandman, and it being the story of him learning to forgive the Sandman, and at the same time learning to respect both the problems that Mary Jane is going through and her own agency, and learning how to support her and let her do the things she needs to do.
Well, that certainly would be better than what this movie does with them, where...
I mean, I can certainly see elements of that was what he was trying to do.
Yeah, and that scene at the bar, which is the height of Peter's failure, certainly is all about how he's just using women as props to get mad at people who has made him mad.
Yeah. But it's still, like... It's a thing where, like, yes, like, it is well done. I think it's that thing also where...
Again, the rest of the film isn't quite built to really facilitate these sorts of scenes.
No.
Yeah. Or you could do a different scene that isn't quite as horrible to the lady characters in the film while still achieving a similar end. You know, you don't actually have to have Peter striking Mary Jane or using another woman as a prop to make her jealous or stuff like that. And, you know, it's not just that scene. I mean, you have, like, Eddie Brock, who's like, you messed up my chances with my girlfriend, so I'm going to take your girlfriend. You know, there's Harry using Mary Jane as a weapon against Peter. Like it's a running thing that happens throughout the whole film, and I think it's that thing where it's kind of like where you want to love the schlock elements of the film, but sometimes, like with these old like schlock kind of ideas and the way these movies kind of
work, the dilemma of dealing with garbage media.
Yes,
you gotta learn how to enjoy things when they're being silly, and also understand, hey, there are problematic elements here, and we need to think about what those mean, what they're saying, and if that's something you actually agree with, even in a film that's been making you laugh so much.
Yeah, I guess it's good that I brought it up then. Or at least I think it's worth. Yeah, it's
certainly something in the videos that I want to be making soon about anime, like just working out how to toe that line between embracing yet also smartly and safely engaging with garbage media is a thing that I want to do. So I'm glad that you've brought this up as a precursor to that.
Yeah, because like a lot of the schlock elements, like they don't really hurt anyone. There's no like, at least from like a casual viewing anyway, it doesn't seem like there's much underlying kind of like no one, like the schlock editing of the bolts being fired off at Sandman in that sewer scene. Like there's nothing. It's schlocky, but it doesn't. There's no like. It's not racist or bigoted in any kind of way. It's just a funny schlock scene. While the scenes with Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy, they also can be filed under schlock. There's an element to them, which is a little bit more problematic. So yeah.
Speaking of schlock, a scene I just remembered. It's when he organizes the romantic dinner with Mary Jane
with Bruce Campbell
at the French restaurant. Yes. What a
use of
Bruce Campbell.
And it's not just Bruce Campbell. Like that whole scene, that was like awkward kind of comedy that I usually cringe at. I had like my face in my hands for a lot of it.
Yeah, it was like, I mean, it was even well acted by everybody involved. I mean, it was like that interplay between Tobey Maguire, like Peter Parker trying to have this. Well, I mean, it's like it's all of that him,
it's all about him.
It's all about him. But then you've got Bruce Campbell thinking that he's ready to pop the question in the background. It's a wonderful scene.
Yeah. It's wonderful, and possibly one of the best examples of how the film is able to get you to think about certain ideas of how people are behaving while making you laugh.
Yeah. It's always nice to have two things going on.
It's a kind of scene where it's like Sam Raimi he can make good things, but being like forced to add things to a movie that probably don't need to be here isn't always. Executives need to stay out.
Now, I am quite fond of arguing in favor of editorial process in the process as you make
absolutely.
art. And certainly this is an example of when there's just been too many fingers in the pie. And it ultimately makes for a film that has lots of good ideas, but isn't quite as effective as it should be in conveying those.
Yeah.
And ultimately,
I'd love
this
to
one
know...
helps it from standing the test of time as one of the all-time greats in this specific genre, which is a very prolific, financially successful genre, even more so after this film than before.
It was nice to look back at old Marvel, I guess.
Yeah. Can we bring back Sam Raimi for another Marvel movie? Like an MCU movie?
Well, I mean, if Rattini can do one, there's no reason why not, surely. Like, if you can get, like, there have been other, like, kind of kooky, independent kind of directors in the past, there's no reason why you couldn't throw him one of the random ones in the future.
I'm just thinking about what sort of IP would be ideal for him at this point. She-Hulk movie? She-Hulk movie.
I guess whenever I think of Sam Raimi, I can't help, even though I know that he's done all the, like, Spider-Man and stuff like that, I can't help but think of fantasy, especially because, like, whenever I think of, like, the kind of schlock that he does, and I think
there is always that fantastic element to the way he tells stories.
Yeah. Like, I can't help but think of, like, a sword and sorcery film is what I really want to see him do. Like, just a really fun,
He could do
like,
the
sword and
next Thor
sorcery
movie.
kind of. Yeah.
Say a
Or
remake
the
of
next-
Xena.
he could do Wonder Woman. He could do the Wonder Woman movie that me and Adam have wanted for a while now. He do it, like, really, in a really fun way. As long as he, like, treats the ladies in his movies a little bit better. I'm perfectly fine with the schlock that he has.
Any final thoughts on Spider-Man or Mr. Smith, or should that do us for this week?
I guess I didn't say whether I recommended either of them. I guess I'll just quickly say no to the first one. No, fuck no. Boring, no. For Spider-Man 3 is weird because never have I watched a movie that I think is enjoyable, but ultimately probably not
Would recommend,
as successful. Yeah, it's weird because usually when you say that, like when you say you enjoy a film but you don't think it was very good, usually that means it was something like The Room or Samurai Cop or something like that. This isn't like that. It's enjoyable, but I don't think it works as a movie, and I think it especially shows at the end of it, where a lot of the plot threads are kind of coming to a close and they don't really mean much. And that's when you realize, despite the amount of fun that you've had, it hasn't really done its job. So that's kind of my final thoughts of Spider-Man, I guess. Fun, but probably ultimately a failure.
I would say it's one worth watching again, just to think about the things it tries to do and which ones resonate and stick out to you.
I would recommend it just for the Bully Cell.
Man, you forgot about the Bully Cell.
I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't know how to, like, I didn't want to just to bring it up just to bring it up because people be like, oh, this is your favorite scene in the movie, Matt. There's no like
Running out of
reason
time,
to...
we've got to bring it up.
Yeah, but now Louis did it for me. It's so fucking good. I'm so glad we can talk about it because everyone else talks about the dance scene. Even though I hadn't watched this film, I knew about the dance scene. But I was too busy in that dance scene, just still laughing at the Bully Cell scene, where basically Dr. Connor, who is apparently a really, really good scientist, despite just being...
He's a physicist, but I guess he's also now a biologist. He even says he's not a biologist, and then just does all the lab work himself.
Yeah, that was super weird. But yeah, he's like calling Peter Parker. I'm not sure if Parker actually even listens to the phone call, but either way, he's trying to tell Peter that these cells in this parasite, which we know is venom, are very highly aggressive, and he thinks are very dangerous. And as he's saying this, it cuts to like
microscopic imagery.
Yeah, microscopic imagery, and we see the venom cell with a bunch of regular cells. And
it's beating them up, bouncing into them as rudely as it can.
Just being an asshole cell, like it's just hitting them. It's something. I don't know if it's like that nerdy to be. I mean, I'm not a scientist myself, but even I know how like absurd that is, and I love it. It's wonderful, and it's probably my favorite scene in the whole movie. Just the insanity of just a cell that's so evil that it literally just beats up other cells.
Yeah, so while we're getting to thoughts...
something.
Yep. So as a final comment to close this one off, I'll just say that when I first saw this in the cinema, there's a bit towards the end where, as the news reporters play the wrestling announcer role of selling you that all hope is lost, Spider-Man swings in front of a big American flag. When I saw this in the cinema, everyone laughed their heads off at how egregiously patriotic this was. Watching it again, like, I think it's one of the better examples of how this film has the subtlety of a brick, but is trying to discuss nuanced ideas, and how Spider-Man here has returned to being the symbol of America, but ultimately it's because he's learned some compassion and some empathy, and to put others before himself, that he's able to present himself as a virtue again. And that's certainly coming a long way from Jefferson Smith nagging at people until they relent and let him be. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll talk to you again sometime soon with some more movies.